The sirens were the first thing I heard, wailing in the distance, cutting through the silence like a blade through paper. I didn't know they were coming for my house. My wife, 7 months pregnant, was alone. I had just clocked in for my shift at the county sheriff's department when my radio buzzed with a dispatch. Female, unconscious, possible poisoning. Location, Pinewood Avenue. That was my street. That was my home. For a split second, everything went still. Time didn't slow down. It stopped. I dropped everything, keys still swinging in the ignition as I tore through traffic, my badge around my neck and a fear in my chest I'd never known before. When I got there, the ambulance was already parked outside, lights flashing against the white porch like a crime scene from some tragic movie. My boots hit the gravel before the engine even cooled. She was on the stretcher, my wife, my whole world. Strapped down with wires taped across her belly, oxygen mask fogging with each desperate breath. Her skin was pale, lips dry, eyes fluttering like she was between two worlds. The paramedic turned to me, his eyes wide. "She's been poisoned. We're losing time. Baby's heart rate is dropping." Those words didn't make sense. Poisoned? By whom? We live in a quiet, gated community. We're good neighbors, friendly, normal. But then something clicked. A memory. Just yesterday, our neighbor Karen, head of the HOA, overly friendly in that fake sugar-sweet way, had brought over a glass bottle of lemonade. Said it was homemade. Said she wanted to apologize for how harsh she'd been about our lawn. My wife, always believing in the good of people, smiled and accepted it. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a neighbor trying to be less of a control freak. Now here we were. I climbed into the ambulance beside her, holding her hand like it was the only thing keeping both of us alive. I could feel the baby kicking through her belly. He was fighting, just like his mother. And so was I. I'm not just her husband. I'm a county sheriff. I've put killers behind bars. I've stared evil in the face. But I never expected it to live next door and smile at my wife through a glass of lemonade. As the ambulance doors slammed shut, my mind was already racing. What was in the drink? What did she use? Did she act alone? I wasn't just going to sit by and hope for justice. I was going to make it happen. And as the lights flashed and the engine roared forward toward the hospital, one thought stayed in my mind. Heavy, cold, and deadly clear. The one who did this. Lives right next door. It started like every American dream does, with a white fence, a clean driveway, and a front porch big enough for a rocking chair and a glass of sweet tea. After years of working brutal shifts, late nights, and holidays, in uniform, I finally had what I thought was the beginning of peace. My wife and I had just moved into Pinewood Grove, a neatly trimmed HOA-run neighborhood that promised quiet evenings, friendly neighbors, and the kind of safety that makes you believe your children could ride bikes at dusk without fear. We chose it for the schools, the tree-lined streets, and honestly, for the illusion that we had left chaos behind. She was 7 months pregnant, glowing in that tired but happy way, and I was finally starting to breathe a little easier. For the first time in a long time, life felt still, stable. The house itself wasn't anything grand, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, a sunroom that caught the morning light just right, and a little backyard where we dreamed of building a swing set. My wife had already picked out nursery colors, and every Saturday we made a ritual of walking hand in hand to the local farmer's market. Life felt normal, beautifully, boringly normal. But in hindsight, I should have known that kind of peace doesn't come without a price. We met Karen on the 3rd day. She was blonde, pressed, and perfect, like someone had pulled her straight out of a Stepford catalog and told her to smile. She walked over with a plate of cookies and a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but her voice was all honey. "Welcome to Pinewood Grove," she chirped. "We're a tight community here. We look out for one another." She handed us the plate, then immediately launched into HOA bylaws, parking rules, trash bin placement, acceptable curtain colors. My wife and I exchanged glances, politely nodding. We assumed she was just overly enthusiastic, passionate about community standards, but now I realized she was warning us in her own subtle way. This wasn't a neighborhood, it was her kingdom. Karen was the self-appointed queen of Pinewood Grove, and the HOA was her throne. She didn't enforce the rules, she weaponized them. At first it was laughable. A passive-aggressive note about our mailbox being 2 inches too tall, a citation for a flower pot being placed off-center on the porch. Then came the warning about leaving our garage door open for more than 5 minutes. I'm a sheriff. I've seen gang wars and drug dens, but I wasn't prepared for the tyranny of lawn regulations and mailbox flags. Still, we tried to stay cordial. We were the new couple on the block, and my wife, ever the peacemaker, believed people just needed kindness. She'd wave at Karen every morning, compliment her roses, and even offered to help plan the neighborhood baby shower the HOA hosted annually. Karen smiled back, but there was always a flicker of something behind her eyes. Something that said she didn't like being challenged, even by friendliness. Soon enough, we noticed that every interaction came with a consequence. When my wife asked about the possibility of putting up a small "baby on board" sign in our window, we got a formal letter stating that non-HOA approved signage violated aesthetic consistency. When I parked my patrol car in front of the house during a 48-hour on-call rotation, she left a note that read, "Please don't make the neighborhood look like a crime scene. It would have been comical if it hadn't started to feel so targeted. Every week, a new complaint. Every week, a new rule violation." Once, Karen reported us for hanging wind chimes on the porch, claiming the sound disrupted neighborhood serenity. We removed them. Another time, my wife's friend parked slightly over the sidewalk line, and she received a $75 fine in the mail. It wasn't enforcement, it was punishment. And yet, even with the tension rising like a slow boil, my wife kept insisting, "She's just lonely. She probably feels left out." That was my wife, always choosing empathy over suspicion. I started watching Karen more closely. She walked the neighborhood like a hawk disguised in a pastel blouse, clipboard always in hand, nodding at others with that mechanical grin. Neighbors barely made eye contact when she passed. Some smiled tight-lipped, others closed their garage doors just a little faster. The illusion of peace started to crumble, but we stayed. Because that house was supposed to be our haven, because we were having a baby, because we believed that if we just played by the rules, it would get better. And for a moment, it did. Karen even knocked on our door one afternoon with what she called a peace gift, a bottle of lemonade she said she made herself. She smiled. My wife smiled back. I hesitated. Something about her eyes didn't match her mouth. Still, we let our guard down. We drank the lemonade. We believed her smile, and in doing so, we unknowingly opened the door to the storm that was already gathering over Pinewood Grove. At first, it was small things, little annoyances that felt too petty to take seriously, too calculated to call coincidence. A misplaced HOA warning on our door about our excessively bright porch light, which had been the same bulb we'd used since move-in. A photograph paperclipped to the letter showing our home at night, as if someone had stood there camera in hand waiting for us to slip. My wife laughed it off, rubbing her swollen belly as she said, "Guess Karen's just bored." But I didn't laugh. Something about it didn't feel like neighborhood policy, it felt like surveillance. Then came the note about our mailbox again, this time with a printed diagram and a measuring tape attached. "Still 1.6 inches above regulation," it read, underlined twice in red ink. It escalated quickly from petty to personal. My wife loved gardening. It helped her breathe, she said. With the baby coming, she had planted soft lavender and rosemary by the front steps. Nothing flashy, just calming scents for our evenings outside. One morning, I came out to find the entire planter, Ripped up, dirt scattered like a message. At first, I thought it might have been raccoons or stray dogs, until I noticed the clean, deliberate cuts at the stems, done with scissors or shears. Then the note arrived. Unauthorized foliage removed to maintain uniform neighborhood appearance. Please consult HOA guidelines. No name, just typed text, printed from a laser printer. But we knew who sent it. The surveillance cameras I installed later confirmed it. Karen, crouching in the early morning light, pruning my wife's plants like she owned them. My wife was crushed. It wasn't just about the plants. It was about control. She had been trying so hard to belong, to make this neighborhood feel like home before the baby came. She baked for neighbors, offered rides, even showed up early to the HOA bake sale Karen organized. But none of it mattered. It was never about inclusion. Karen didn't want neighbors. She wanted subjects. The final straw for me came one Tuesday afternoon. I got home early from work and found my wife sitting on the steps crying into her hands. Her face was red, her breath shaky, and for a moment I thought something had happened to the baby. But then I saw the letter in her lap. Violation of community harmony, it read. We've received complaints regarding loud, emotional outbursts coming from your property. If such disturbances continue, the HOA will consider further action. My wife had been crying on the phone with her mother. Pregnancy hormones. Missing. Home. The stress of being constantly watched. And somehow that was now an infraction. I clenched the paper so hard it tore. My blood boiled. I wasn't just angry. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had let this happen under my watch, in my home. I was trained to spot harassment, to step in when others abused their power. And yet here we were, victims of a neighborhood tyrant wearing pearls and pastel blouses. Still, we tried to stay civil. Karen's power came from control, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing us crack. But she didn't need us to crack. She wanted my wife to break. She started walking by our house more frequently, slowing down just enough to peer in the windows. Sometimes she'd stand outside, pretending to check her phone while staring at the nursery window. Other times, she'd leave anonymous notes with backhanded comments. You must be exhausted growing a human and forgetting to pull weeds. Those stretch marks must be a badge of honor. It was psychological warfare. I caught her once on our lawn, bending over to inspect our flower bed again. I stepped out and asked if she needed help. She straightened with that plastic smile. Just making sure the sprinkler isn't leaking onto the sidewalk. Slippery surfaces are a liability. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, told a different story. I said nothing, just stared. She left, but not before dropping a small card into our mailbox. HOA meeting, Friday night, mandatory attendance. We'd already gone to the last 3. There was nothing mandatory about it, except in Karen's mind. We tried to keep our heads down, but nothing we did seemed right anymore. A guest parked slightly crooked on our driveway. Warning: a birthday. Banner too vibrant for HOA standards. Violation. A baby shower my wife tried to plan with neighborhood moms. Abruptly canceled after Karen polled the group and found it too disruptive. Even the neighborhood watch group my wife volunteered for started excluding her from texts. She felt it. I saw it. The isolation, the rejection, the slow turning of the community into Karen's echo chamber. And then, just when things seemed to settle, when we had a few days of quiet, no notes, no violations, no sidelong glances from neighbors, Karen showed up at our door with a smile. She held a bottle of lemonade in both hands, frosty and covered with condensation. Just a peace gift, she said. I know we've had our bumps. I hope there's no hard feelings. My wife hesitated, looked at me. I gave the smallest nod, even though my gut screamed otherwise. She accepted it, thanked her. Karen's eyes locked on mine for just a second longer than necessary. She smiled wider. Some people need to learn their place, but I'm glad we're understanding each other now. She turned and walked away. That lemonade sat in our fridge for a few hours before my wife poured a glass and took her first sip. It would be her last moment of peace for days, and mine. Mine would turn into the longest, most harrowing fight of my life. It started slowly, so quietly that if I hadn't seen it unfold with my own eyes, I might have missed it. The kind of moment that seems ordinary until it spirals into something unforgettable, irreversible. My wife was sitting in the sunroom that morning, the place she loved most in the house. Light poured through the windows, catching her hair just right. The soft swell of her belly rising and falling as she gently rocked in the chair. She had that peaceful look, half mother, half warrior, one hand cradling her stomach, the other holding that damned glass of lemonade. I was in the kitchen, reading over some case files, when I heard it. The glass shattering against the hardwood, followed by a sound that didn't belong in our home, something between a choke and a scream. I ran in and found her slumped forward, her hand clutching her throat. Her lips were dry and cracked, her eyes wide and unfocused, gasping, no, fighting for air. "Breathe, baby, come on," I whispered, panic rising like a flood inside me. Her skin was cold, not clammy, cold. Her dress was soaked in sweat, and her entire body trembled like she was freezing and burning at the same time. I tried to sit her up. She couldn't even hold her own weight. Then I saw it. Her fingernails tinged blue, a sign I'd seen before, in the field. Oxygen deprivation. Poison. My mind screamed it louder than my mouth could. She's been poisoned. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped it. "Pregnant woman, 7 months, severe reaction, possible poisoning. Address is 1405 Pinewood Grove. Get here now." I wasn't thinking like a sheriff anymore. I wasn't a lawman. I wasn't an investigator. I was a husband, a desperate one. I checked her pulse. It was there, but weak, and the longer I waited, the more distant her eyes became. I placed my hand on her belly. No movement. I felt like the walls were closing in. My wife, my son. They were both slipping from me, right there on the living room floor. The ambulance took 6 minutes. It felt like 6 lifetimes. When the EMTs arrived, I was holding her on the rug, whispering nonsense. Her name, our baby's name, promises I wasn't sure I could keep. They took over fast, assessing her vitals, strapping her to the stretcher, cutting through her dress to attach monitors to her belly. "Fetal heart rate is dropping," one of them said. "We need to move, now." Her eyelids fluttered as they wheeled her out. I climbed in behind her. I didn't ask. I didn't need permission. They saw my badge, but more than that, they saw the look in my eyes. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights, beeping monitors, and my own, heartbeat hammering in my chest. I could hear them radioing ahead. "Possible organophosphate exposure. Immediate OB intervention needed. We may be looking at a premature emergency C-section." I didn't even know what that chemical was at the time. I just knew it sounded like death. I kept staring at her, willing her to open her eyes, to say something, to squeeze my hand. But she didn't. Her breathing was shallow, machine-assisted, and the only thing louder than the sirens was the thought screaming through my head. It was that lemonade. We reached the ER and she was rushed away, swallowed by swinging double doors and a team of specialists in scrubs and gloves. I was left in a hallway under flickering fluorescent lights, holding a plastic bag with the glass she'd dropped, still sticky with lemonade. I called the crime lab. "I need this tested now. Priority 1. Possible poisoning. I'll explain later." And then came the waiting. The kind of waiting that kills you by inches. I sat in that hospital corridor surrounded by strangers, doctors walking past like ghosts, the sounds of life and death echoing through the walls. I kept going over every moment. Karen's smirk, the lemonade bottle, the way she handed it to my wife like it was a peace offering. I replayed it all, frame by frame, and with every passing second, the pieces fell into place. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't fate. It was personal, calculated, done by someone who knew exactly how to inflict pain. A nurse finally came out, eyes tired, mask pulled down. She's stable, for now. The baby's still fighting. We're monitoring, both closely. But the toxins, they were strong. She's lucky you got her here in time. Lucky? That wasn't luck. That was war. A war that had just begun. I stood up slowly, my legs weak beneath me. There's a point in every man's life where something snaps, not in anger, but in resolve. I'd spent my career tracking down threats in alleys and on highways, but now I had to face something worse. Evil hiding in plain sight, wearing pastel sweaters and fake smiles. I walked to the vending machine not for food, but for silence. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a neighbor. "Hey, saw an ambulance. Is everything okay?" I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. No, nothing was okay. And when I looked at the reflection in the vending machine's glass, I didn't see a husband anymore. I saw the sheriff, ready to hunt. The moment the doctors told me my wife was stable but sedated, I kissed her forehead and stepped out of the room, slowly, silently, but with purpose burning behind my eyes. I wasn't just walking away from her side. I was walking into a different version of myself. The man who sat helpless in the ambulance was gone. The husband, the father-to-be, the broken man begging for his family's survival, that man had been buried in the chaos of the ER. What rose in his place was someone sharper, colder, and very, very focused. I'd worn the badge for 12 years. I knew how to track criminals, interrogate suspects, follow a hunch until it bled truth. Now all that training, all that discipline, wasn't for the streets. It was for her, for us. And I already had my first lead. The lemonade bottle? Still half full, tucked in the fridge inside a sealed Ziploc bag I'd stashed in the hospital cooler before heading out. I drove straight to the forensics lab, my tires slicing the wet asphalt like a scalpel. I didn't call. I didn't wait. I walked straight into the night shift lab and put the evidence down with calm, precise words. I need this tested. Fast. Priority level 1. Suspected poisoning, high-grade toxicity. Pregnant victim. The technician looked at me and didn't argue. Maybe it was the badge. Maybe it was the fire in my eyes. Either way, he nodded, and I walked back out into the night, not as a man chasing justice, but as one delivering it. From there, I went home. The house was too quiet, too sterile. The glass shards still lay on the sunroom floor, blood-stained from my wife's fingers. The rocking chair tilted just slightly, like a ghost had stood up mid-sentence. I didn't touch anything. Instead, I went to my office, opened my secured hard drive, and pulled up the security camera footage. I had installed the system 2 months ago after Karen had accidentally entered our yard to measure our fence for compliance. Since then, it had captured dozens of passive-aggressive moments, but now I was looking for something darker. And I found it. There, on the recording from 2 days prior, Karen stood on our porch at 6:43 a.m. Not her usual friendly knock-and-wait routine. No, this time she looked around, reached into her tote bag, pulled out the lemonade bottle, and placed it beside our front door. Then, she removed a pair of gloves, latex. She stuffed them into her pocket and wiped the bottle down with a white cloth. I paused the footage. Zoomed in. Her face was cold, calculated. No smile, no sweetness. Just business. The kind of look I'd seen before, in the eyes of people who believed they'd get away with it. I downloaded the footage, backed it up on 3 drives, and then texted a buddy from the narcotics unit. Need a quiet favor. No paperwork yet. Can you run a compound analysis on an organic sample? He replied instantly, "You got it. Bring it now." Before leaving, I walked through the neighborhood once. Just once. The houses looked the same as always. Pristine lawns, warm porch lights, the illusion of peace. But now I saw it for what it really was, a theater of masks. Pinewood Grove wasn't a community, it was a stage, and Karen was its queen, casting roles and writing rules for whoever she pleased. But what she didn't know was that someone else had just taken the director's chair. The next morning, the lab report hit my inbox like a bullet. Traces of glyphosate and carbaryl, two common pesticides, were detected in the lemonade. Combined, they formed a neurotoxic cocktail known to cause respiratory distress and fetal complications. It wasn't some kitchen accident or bad fruit. It was deliberate, precise, lethal. I forwarded the report to myself, printed a hard copy, and placed it next to a copy of the video still showing Karen with the bottle. I wasn't ready to arrest her yet. Not until I had the final nail. I needed motive, timing, and ideally, someone else to say what I already knew. So I went door to door. Just a few neighbors at first. Nothing official. Just casual conversation. One man, 2 houses down, finally cracked. "Look," he said nervously, "I didn't want to get involved, but Karen, she said some weird stuff last week. Called your wife a liability. Said the baby was just a distraction from keeping up the HOA's image." I asked if he'd be willing to say that again, maybe on the record. He hesitated, but nodded. That was it. Badge on. Body cam charged. I was ready. This wasn't just a woman harassing her neighbor. This was a predator who thought she could hide behind bylaws and fake smiles, who thought I was just another soft suburban husband she could manipulate. But she forgot one thing. The badge I wore wasn't just for show. It was my weapon. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread like a crime scene, lab results, screenshots of Karen placing the lemonade bottle, the timeline I'd built down to the minute. Every detail had been cross-checked, every dot connected. I wasn't just convinced, I was ready. Ready to walk into that HOA meeting with the weight of the truth. Ready to end this game she started. Karen thought she could poison my wife, harm my unborn son, and walk away behind her curtain of clipped lawns and homeowners' bylaws, but she forgot who she was dealing with. I'm not just a man. I'm the law, and tonight I wasn't coming as a neighbor. I was coming as a sheriff with nothing left to lose. The HOA meetings were always held in the Pinewood Community Center, a room that smelled like fresh paint and stale cookies, decorated with motivational posters about unity and civic pride. Tonight, the chairs were arranged in neat rows. Residents trickled in slowly, clutching their coffee cups and whispering the usual complaints about parking spaces and overgrown shrubs. Karen was already there, perched at the front like a queen on her throne, clipboard in hand, pearls around her neck, and that smile, thin, polite, polished. As if she hadn't almost killed someone 2 days ago, she saw me and gave the fakest wave I've ever seen. "Logan," she called sweetly. "Good to see you. I hope your wife is feeling better." My jaw clenched. My hand curled around the folder in my grip, tight enough to crumple the corner. I gave her a nod but said nothing. She didn't know what was coming. Not yet. She opened the meeting with her usual sing-song voice, flipping through agenda points like nothing had changed. Trash pickup delays, Christmas lighting regulations, and, oh yes, complaints about certain residents not maintaining community decorum. She looked directly at me, barely concealing the jab. That was the moment. That was her last smug insult. I stood. The room went quiet. "I have something to address," I said, voice calm but sharp as glass. Every eye turned to me. Karen blinked, but that smile never wavered. "Oh? Of course, Sheriff. Is it about the mailbox violations or the—" "No," I cut in. "It's about the attempted poisoning of my pregnant wife. You could have heard a pin drop." Someone at the back gasped. Karen's face didn't change. Yet. That's a very serious accusation, she said slowly, choosing her words like a chess player. You're not suggesting that... I stepped forward, pulled a small projector from my bag and placed it on the table. I'm not suggesting, I said. I'm showing. The video began to play. The footage was clear. Karen walking up our porch, wearing gloves, placing the bottle, wiping it down. The room watched in stunned silence. Her face was unmistakable. The timestamp matched the morning before my wife collapsed. Her smile finally cracked. But I wasn't done. I laid out the lab report. The drink contained glyphosate and carbaryl. When combined, they form a neurotoxic agent. Not something you'd find in homemade lemonade unless you were trying to hurt someone. Karen shifted in her seat. I brought that as a gesture of goodwill. I didn't know. You wore gloves. You wiped your prints. That's not goodwill. That's premeditated. My voice rose, steady but loud. And your motive? You've been harassing my wife for months, destroying her plants, fining her for fake violations. You even left a note the same day she collapsed, saying her emotional outbursts were disturbing the neighborhood. The neighbors around her began to shift uncomfortably, some backing their chairs away. One of them, Mrs. Jensen from 3 houses down, spoke up. Karen told me your wife was a problem, said she was making the neighborhood look unstable. I thought she was just being rude. I didn't think... You're lying, Karen snapped, eyes wide now, veneer slipping fast. You can't prove anything. I pulled out one last folder. Signed witness statements from 3 neighbors who heard you say you wished my wife would move away. One of them heard you say the baby would ruin the aesthetic of the block. That was the breaking point. Karen stood, knocking over her chair, her face now twisted with panic. This is slander! You're using your badge to bully me! No, I said, pulling my badge from my jacket and holding it up. I'm using my badge to serve an arrest warrant. Gasps echoed again. The 2 uniformed deputies I'd asked to wait outside stepped in. I nodded. They moved toward her. Karen backed up, trembling now, all that control she had clung to for years crumbling with every step. You can't do this, she shrieked. This is my neighborhood. I made it perfect. You almost killed my family, I said, voice low and steady. And no amount of rules or roses will cover that up. They cuffed her quietly, read her rights, and escorted her out. The room sat in stunned silence as the door slammed behind her. I looked around at the faces, neighbors who once looked the other way, who once believed her charm, her rules, her fake concern. Now they looked at me with something else in their eyes. Respect, and maybe a little shame. I cleared my throat. If anyone else would like to discuss mailbox violations, I'll be outside. No one said a word. I walked out into the night, my boots crunching the gravel, the cool air hitting my face like water after fire. I had confronted monsters in alleyways, chased killers across state lines. But this was different. This was the monster behind the garden fence, the evil dressed in etiquette. And tonight, I didn't just expose her, I ended her reign. For my wife, for my son, and for every quiet neighbor who'd ever been too afraid to speak. The sirens faded that night not in panic, but in resolution. Karen was gone. The queen of clipped hedges, of HOA fines and forced smiles, was no longer walking the sidewalks of Pinewood Grove with her clipboard and her quiet cruelty. She was, in a holding cell, booked on charges of attempted murder, premeditated poisoning, and endangering the life of an unborn child. The arrest made headlines in our county. HOA president accused in poison plot against sheriff's pregnant wife. And suddenly the same neighbors who once avoided eye contact were now stopping by, wide-eyed and apologetic, delivering casseroles. and murmured confessions. They hadn't known how bad it was, they said. They hadn't realized. And maybe that was true. Or maybe they had just chosen the comfort of silence over the discomfort of truth. Either way, the mask was off now. Karen's reign had ended not with a neighborhood vote, but in handcuffs. Back at the hospital, my wife woke up the next morning, groggy and confused, but alive. Her first words were about the baby. Always the baby. I told her he was okay, that he was strong, just like his mother. The doctors had managed to stabilize her before the worst hit. The toxic levels in her system had begun to clear. The baby's heart rate had returned to normal. We had been spared, not by chance, but by vigilance. She held my hand, tears running silently down her cheeks, and for the first time in days, I saw the color return to her face. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. Not about the footage, the confrontation, or how close she had come to death. She'd lived it. That was enough. The rest could wait. We stayed in that hospital for 3 more days, and in that time, I watched her heal. I watched our baby move on the monitor like a heartbeat with legs, and I realized something I'd never said aloud until then. I wasn't just her protector. I was his protector now, too. This wasn't just a family anymore. This was my legacy. My reason. My badge gave me authority, but my family gave me purpose. We moved out of Pinewood Grove not long after. The house never felt like home again, not after what had happened in those walls. We found a little place near the river. No HOA, no committees, no hidden poison behind welcome smiles. Just trees, fresh air, and the quiet kind of peace you only recognize after surviving war. My wife began to smile again, slower but more real. She nested, decorated, sang to the baby. And when he finally came into this world, healthy, loud, and full of life, I cried like a man who'd seen hell and come out whole. Karen was sentenced 6 months later. 20 years, no parole. Her courtroom defense was as hollow as her threats had been petty. She wept, begged, said it was all a misunderstanding. But the jury didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. Justice finally was served. Sometimes I still get letters from people in Pinewood Grove. Some thank me for standing up. Others apologize for staying silent. A few ask how my wife is doing. I don't always respond, but I read every word. And each time, I'm reminded of something I learned through fire. Evil doesn't always knock with a gun in hand. Sometimes, it shows up with lemonade and a smile. But the one thing Karen never understood, the one thing that became her undoing, is that you never underestimate a man who wears a badge and a wedding ring. Because when you threaten his home, his wife, his unborn child, he doesn't just come back. He comes back with justice. If this story struck a chord with you, if you've ever felt powerless in the face of quiet cruelty or watched someone you love suffer at the hands of people hiding behind rules and false smiles, then don't stay silent. Stand with us. Comment justice below to show that you believe in defending what matters most, family, truth, and doing what's right, no matter how polite the enemy appears. Tap that like button if you think Karen got exactly what she deserved and help us shine a light on the darkness that too often hides behind homeowners associations and empty smiles. And most importantly, subscribe to the HOA Stories, where we share real, powerful, and sometimes unthinkable tales of people who fought back. Stories like this one aren't just drama, they're warnings, lessons, and for some, deeply personal. On this channel, we give voice to the victims, the fighters, and the ones who said enough. So join our growing community, where truth wins and justice isn't just a word, it's a promise. This is Sheriff Logan, and if there's one thing you should remember, it's this: evil wears many masks, but it never escapes the eyes of those who protect their own.